Commander Vexenar's upper appendages twitched nervously as the human transport's docking clamps engaged with a resonating thud. The vessel was crude by coalition standards, all sharp angles and exposed thermal plating, lacking the biomechanical elegance of proper military craft. Remind me again why we're accepting these primitives into our ranks. First Officer Krex murmured, her crystalline exoskeleton clicking softly as she shifted position. Vexenar's compound eyes flickered toward the holographic display showing the Coalition's latest territorial losses. Because the hive mind has pushed through our outer defense ring, and we're running out of soldiers who can think independently enough to counter their tactics. The hangar bay pressurized with a hiss, and the human vessel's hatch descended with surprising grace, considering its otherwise unrefined design. The Coalition Welcoming Committee, representatives from 7 member species, straightened their posture and prepared for the ceremonial greeting. What emerged was nothing like the disciplined military unit they had expected. The humans spilled out in a disorderly fashion, some pointing at the station's architecture with open curiosity, others already engaged in conversation with each other rather than focusing on the dignitaries before them. Most concerning was their cargo. Instead of the traditional ceremonial weapons or cultural artifacts that new species typically brought to honor their induction into the coalition forces, the humans carried duffel bags that clinked with mysterious contents. A tall human female with dark skin and close-cropped hair stepped forward, offering what their cultural briefing identified as a salute. Captain Sarah Chen, according to the identification markers on her battle-worn uniform. Commander Vexenar, Captain Sarah Chen, Earth Defense Force, 142nd Expeditionary Battalion. We're honored to join the Coalition's efforts against the hive mind. Vexenar's translator implant rendered her words perfectly, though he noted the peculiar informality of her tone. Welcome, Captain. The Galactic Coalition appreciates Earth's contribution to our mutual defense. He gestured to the disorganized troops behind her. Your soldiers seem less formal than we anticipated. Captain Chen smiled, a disconcerting baring of teeth that her species somehow intended as friendly. We've been cooped up on that transport for 3 weeks, sir. They're just eager to stretch their legs. As if to illustrate her point, 2 human soldiers had already unpacked a small spherical object and were bouncing it against the hangar wall, measuring the angles of its return with surprising accuracy. First Officer Krex stepped forward, crystalline limbs rigid with disapproval. What are they doing? Is this some combat readiness exercise? Basketball trigonometry, Chen replied casually. Helps with calculating ricochet trajectories for non-guided projectiles. Vexenar wasn't convinced. And these containers your troops are unpacking. They contain tactical equipment, I presume. Chen hesitated. Well, we've got playing cards, board games, musical instruments, crafting supplies, some sports equipment. The essentials for a long deployment. Essentials. Krex's voice rose an octave. Our briefings indicated humans were formidable warriors. These look like recreation items. They are, Chen confirmed, watching as her soldiers continued to transform the formal reception area into something resembling organized chaos. One group was already setting up what appeared to be a primitive string instrument, while others unpacked flatboards with multicolored playing pieces. Vexenar's mandibles clicked in concern. Captain, we're at war. Your battalion is being deployed to Outpost Epsilon on the front lines. This is not a leisure assignment. Captain Chen's expression shifted to something more serious. With all due respect, Commander, you don't want humans getting bored during deployment. Trust me on this. And why is that, Captain? She watched as one of her engineers was already eyeing the hangar bay's automated loading system with disturbing interest. Because the most dangerous human isn't the one facing direct combat. She nodded toward her increasingly restless troops. It's the one with too much time and not enough to do. Outpost Epsilon had never been so quiet, or so loud, depending on which section you visited. 2 months into the human deployment, the station had developed a peculiar duality that baffled the coalition species. Dr. Lyrics, chief psychologist for the coalition military integration program, flicked through security footage with growing concern. His tentacles curled around his data tablet as he showed Admiral Zextrill the latest incident. "This is Private Rodriguez," he explained, pointing to a human soldier who had completely disassembled her standard-issue coalition plasma rifle on a mess hall table. "She's doing this while blindfolded." The Admiral's exoskeleton pulsed with agitation. For what tactical purpose? According to her squad mates, to beat her previous record. She reassembled it in 3 minutes, 42 seconds. Dr. Lyrics advanced to the next clip. "This is Sergeant Petal. He's reprogrammed the food synthesizer to create something called ice cream that wasn't in the nutrition database." Admiral Zextrill leaned closer. "That's a security breach of coalition technology." "Indeed," Lyrics agreed, advancing to more footage. "And here's Lieutenant Kumar, who reprogrammed a security drone to deliver compliments in various alien dialects. It told Ambassador Mendak of the Quillian hierarchy that his pheromone sacs were exceptionally symmetrical. The ambassador nearly triggered a diplomatic incident. The Admiral's breathing slits contracted in distress. Are they experiencing combat withdrawal? Some form of psychological break? Dr. Lyrics had spent countless cycles studying human behavior patterns. That was my initial diagnosis. But observing their combat readiness drills shows no degradation in capability. In fact, he hesitated. "Continue, Doctor." "Their combat effectiveness has improved. Reaction times are 8% faster than initial baseline. Weapons accuracy has increased 12%. And most notably, their problem-solving capabilities in simulated crisis scenarios have improved by 23%. The Admiral's compound eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep confusion. While they're also exhibiting these disciplinary issues. Impossible. Dr. Lyrics zoomed in on footage of human soldiers in the station's cargo bay, where they had constructed an elaborate obstacle course using shipping containers. What appears to be recreational behavior may actually be adaptive training. They're constantly challenging themselves and each other. A soft chime announced the arrival of Captain Chen, summoned to explain the latest human disruption. The door slid open to admit her, and the Admiral noticed she carried yet another unusual object, a spherical puzzle of coloured sections that she manipulated absently with one hand. "Captain, your soldiers have modified the environmental controls in Section 14 to create what they're calling a slip-and-slide zone, using cleaning solution and modified environmental suits. Explain." Chen's fingers continued working the puzzle cube without looking at it. "It's been 62 days with no combat action, sir. They're getting restless." Restless. The Admiral's voice rose. "They're dismantling my station." "With respect, Admiral, they're improving it." Chen set down the completed puzzle cube. "Private Wu discovered a flaw in your ventilation system while setting up the slip and slide. Engineering teams have already patched it." Dr. Lyrics's tentacles trembled with excitement. "Your people deliberately create chaos to identify potential problems." "Not deliberately, Doctor. It's just a side effect of boredom." Chen's expression grew serious. and this is actually pretty tame. The Admiral's exoskeleton flushed a concerning shade of orange. Tame. You consider reprogramming security systems and modifying weapons tame. Absolutely, Chen replied, gesturing toward the station's observation deck, where several humans were currently measuring the curvature of the viewport with unusual intensity. You'll know when they're really bored. That's when the real innovations start. Dr. Lyrix leaned forward. And what does really bored look like, Captain? Chen's smile was unsettling. Pray to your gods you never have to find out. She glanced at the station's long-range scanners. Though given how quiet this sector has been, you might get your answer soon enough. The alarms blared exactly 4 months and 3 days into the human deployment on Outpost Epsilon. The timing couldn't have been worse, or better, depending on one's perspective. Hive mind vessels detected. 3 battlecruisers on approach vector. The Mendara communications officer's voice trembled as the station's sensors confirmed what many had feared. Boarding pods detected. Commander Vexnar rushed to the command center, nearly colliding with a makeshift cart careening down the corridor. He recognized Private Diaz and Specialist Wong, participants in what the humans had dubbed the Great Corridor Olympics, an unauthorized competition involving racing through the station's service tunnels. Get to your battle stations immediately, he ordered, but the humans were already moving with surprising efficiency. All traces of their previous frivolity vanished. Sir, Wong called back, already tapping commands into her wrist device. We've got this. Protocol Homebrew is active. Before Vexanar could question what Protocol Homebrew meant, the station's lighting shifted to a red hue he'd never seen in the emergency protocols. Throughout the station, humans abandoned their games and recreational activities with practiced precision, but instead of heading to standard defensive positions, they moved with purpose toward what appeared to be predetermined locations. In the command center, Admiral Zex Trill watched in bewilderment as Captain Chen entered with a calm demeanor entirely inappropriate for their dire circumstances. Captain, we have 3 hive mind cruisers inbound. Your troops are not at their assigned defense stations. Chen nodded, activating a holographic overlay that none of the coalition officers recognized. They're at their effective defense stations, Admiral. The standard defensive grid has too many vulnerabilities. We've been mapping alternatives since we arrived. You've what? Tess X Trill's exoskeleton flared in alarm. The first impacts rocked the station as hive boarding pods breached the outer hull. On the security feeds, coalition officers expected to see the standard hive invasion pattern, mechanical precision as their droned soldiers moved through the corridors toward vital systems. Instead, the feeds showed chaos. The service tunnel carts, now loaded with improvised explosives, launched directly into the boarding tubes, detonating and sealing several breaches immediately. In Section 12, where the Hive forces had successfully entered, they encountered corridors mysteriously slick with the same substance from the humans' slip-and-slide zone, causing the normally sure-footed Hive drones to falter and slide directly into pre-positioned crossfire. What is happening? Dr. Lyrix asked, tentacles waving in confusion as he observed the security feeds. Captain Chen allowed herself a small smile. Remember when Lieutenant Kumar reprogrammed that complement drone? She didn't just change its dialogue protocols, she mapped the entire station's security network. Those drones are now running electronic countermeasures against the Hive's coordination signals. On another screen, Corporal Diaz was demonstrating his perfect ricochet shot, bouncing specialized ammunition off corridor walls to get Hive soldiers around corners, preventing them from establishing defensive positions. The slip-and-slide experiments? Chen continued. That led to the development of a polymer coating that interferes with the hive drone's locomotion systems. The corridor races mapped optimal movement paths for counter-boarding actions. Admiral Zex Trill watched in stunned silence as the humans executed a defense that bore no resemblance to coalition tactical doctrine, yet was undeniably effective. The makeshift weapons, the reproposed equipment, the seemingly random modifications, all suddenly revealed their purpose. As the last hive boarding party was neutralized and their cruisers began to retreat, the Admiral turned to Captain Chen with new understanding in his compound eyes. This was your plan all along. These games were preparation. Chen shook her head. Not exactly, sir. We were just bored and started tinkering. The preparations came naturally. She gestured to the security feed showing Specialist Wong reprogramming a captured hive drone. And now that we've seen their tech up close, just wait until you see what we come up with next. Dr. Mira Vextel positioned the neural scanner carefully over Private Jenkins' head as the human sat unnaturally still, a state she had observed was difficult for their species to maintain. And you're certain this won't hurt? Jenkins asked, eyeing the unfamiliar technology. Completely painless, Vextel assured him, her forearms making final adjustments to the calibration. I'm simply measuring your brain's response patterns to various stimuli. Jenkins nodded, causing the scanner to shift slightly. I've got a bet with Rodriguez that my brain's weirder than hers. 20 credits as I write. Vextel's skin shifted hue slightly, an indication of amusement in her species. Even during a scientific study, the humans found ways to compete and create games. This was precisely what had made her research so controversial and potentially so valuable. Behind the observation glass, Admiral Zex Trill watched with skepticism alongside a delegation from Coalition High Command. After the surprising defense of Outpost Epsilon, military leadership had reluctantly approved Vextel's research, but few expected meaningful results. Let's begin, Vextel said, initiating the first scan. I'm going to show you a series of tactical scenarios. Please respond as you normally would. The first simulations were standard: enemy formations, defensive positions, supply line vulnerabilities. Jenkins responded with textbook coalition answers, his neural patterns showing expected activation in planning and analysis regions. Then Vextel changed the parameters. The screen went blank, showing only a simple waiting message. Next simulation loading. Please wait. Except no simulation was loading. 1 minute passed, then 5. Jenkins began to tap his fingers. By minute 7, he was fidgeting noticeably. At minute 10, something remarkable happened on the neural scans. Are you seeing this? Vextel whispered into her communication device. Behind the glass, the coalition officers leaned forward as Jenkins' brain lit up in patterns unlike anything they'd seen in the previous tactical exercises. Regions associated with creativity, innovation, and novel problem-solving sparked with intense activity, creating neural connections across seemingly unrelated brain sectors. At 15 minutes, Vextel couldn't maintain the deception. The simulation isn't actually loading, Private Jenkins. I was measuring your response to an activity. Jenkins grinned. Yeah, I figured that out around minute 3. So I've been mentally designing a modification for the station's waste recycling system to create better fertilizer for the hydroponics bay. Want to hear about it? Later, in the briefing room, Vextel presented her findings to the stunned coalition leadership. Every species we've encountered responds to inactivity with decreased neural function, She explained, displaying comparative brain scans. Mendari enter meditation states. Quillians reduce metabolic activity. Even my species enters conservation mode when unstimulated. She switched to the human scans. Humans do the opposite. Their brains cannot tolerate understimulation and actively work to create engagement. What we're seeing isn't psychological deterioration. It's their natural evolutionary response to an environment that doesn't challenge them sufficiently. Admiral Zexatril studied the neural patterns. You're suggesting their apparent lack of discipline is actually a feature, not a malfunction, Vextel completed. Humans evolved as pursuit predators on a highly dynamic planet with thousands of potential threats. Their neural architecture becomes hyperactive during periods of inactivity, generating possibilities and scenarios at an accelerated rate. A Sorvat general's scales rippled with doubt. How does this help our war effort? Vextal's 4 hands gestured emphatically. Because their boredom-induced innovations defy conventional logic. The hive mind can predict standard military responses because they follow logical patterns. But humans in unstimulated environments create solutions that no predictive algorithm could anticipate. Are you suggesting, Admiral Zexatril said slowly, that we should deliberately induce boredom in human soldiers? Not just permit it, Admiral, Vextal replied, displaying the data from Outpost Epsilon's successful defense. Weaponize it. Outpost Zeta-9 had been scheduled for decommissioning before the war. The aging station orbited an unremarkable gas giant in a system with no strategic value. Its environmental systems were outdated, its weapons platforms obsolete, and its communication array barely functional. Coalition engineers had declared it barely habitable in their last assessment. Admiral Zexatril now considered it the perfect laboratory for Dr. Vextal's radical theory. You've removed all recreational facilities. He asked the station's Luminar commander, whose crystalline form glittered anxiously in the dim lighting. As instructed, Admiral. No entertainment centers, no simulation chambers, not even standard exercise equipment. The commander's facets pulsed with concern. We've also reduced supply deliveries and communication as specified. The humans will have only basic maintenance tools and standard rations. Dr. Vextal monitored the deployment from her temporary laboratory adjacent to the command center. Remember, minimal interference. We need to observe their natural responses to unstimulating conditions. The human battalion arrived with none of the disorder that had characterized their first appearance at Outpost Epsilon. Captain Chen led her troops with formal discipline, accepting their assignment without complaint. If they were concerned about being stationed on an obsolete platform with minimal resources, they showed no outward sign. 2 days after deployment, the station's systems operated normally. By the end of the first week, the command staff had begun to hope that perhaps the humans had learned proper military discipline. Then the modifications began. First came the distillery, constructed from environmental filtration components. Engineer Lopez claimed it was essential for morale, while demonstrating how the modified system actually improved air recycling efficiency by 17%. The mess hall transformation followed, tables and partitions reconfigured into what the humans called a theatre, where they performed elaborate stories for each other using improvised costumes made from spare uniform parts. By week 3, maintenance bots had been reprogrammed to play something called laser tag, which humans insisted improved their combat reflexes while simultaneously calibrating the bots' targeting systems to unprecedented accuracy. Most concerning were the weapons modifications. Standard-issue plasma rifles now fired in spiraling patterns because, As Sergeant Patel explained with complete seriousness, it looks cooler. Someone had attached graviton manipulators to projectiles to make them curve in flight, which violated several laws of conventional ballistics, but somehow improved accuracy in zero-gravity conditions. It's worse than we anticipated. The Luminar commander reported, 14 standard cycles into the experiment. They've modified nearly every system on the station. Engineering no longer follows any recognizable coalition protocols. Admiral Zex Trill reviewed the reports with growing alarm. Dr. Vextall, this experiment has gone too far. We're creating a dangerously unstable environment. The Xenop psychologist's expression remained calm as she studied the latest neural scans from volunteer subjects aboard Zeta 9. On the contrary, Admiral, the station's operational efficiency has improved by 32%, despite reduced resources. Their modifications are unorthodox but demonstrably effective. Effective or not, we cannot have undisciplined. The communication channel interrupted with an emergency alert. The Luminar communications officer's crystalline structure pulsed with alarm. Admiral, long-range sensors have detected a massive hive mind fleet approaching core world Eridani. Estimated arrival in 48 hours. Dex Trill's exoskeleton paled. Nearest combat-ready fleet position. None within response range, sir. The officer's facets dimmed with despair. Eridani will be defenseless. A heavy silence fell over the command center until Dr. Vextall spoke softly. Not entirely defenseless, Admiral. She gestured toward the screen showing Outpost Zeta 9, where humans had just completed what appeared to be modifications to the station's ancient thrusters. We have one option that the hive mind won't expect. The Admiral stared at the chaotic activity on the screen, watching humans test equipment that coalition engineers would never have approved. Deploy them, he ordered, his voice barely audible. And may the cosmic harmony preserve us all. The victory at Eridani changed everything. Coalition High Command had expected a massacre. Instead, they witnessed a miracle. Outpost Zeta 9, piloted through 3 emergency jump points using modified engines that coalition engineers insisted shouldn't function, arrived at Eridani with 40 minutes to spare before the hive mind fleet. What followed defied conventional military analysis. The humans deployed countermeasures that no war college had ever theorized. Maintenance drones reconfigured to project holographic images created phantom fleet signatures that confused hive targeting systems. The cool-looking spiral pattern plasma rifles penetrated previously impervious hive shields by hitting at continually changing angles that prevented adaptive defenses from calibrating. Most effective were the specialized ammunition designed for the humans' trick shots, which followed curved trajectories to strike hive ships from unexpected vectors. The battle ended with 18 hive battlecruisers destroyed or disabled, and the humans celebrating with improvised musical instruments and cups of their engine room distillery's latest creation. Admiral Zexter Trill stood before the Coalition War Council 1 week later, his exoskeleton still bearing scorch marks from the battle. I propose the immediate establishment of specialized human units designated as Chaos Engineers, he stated, ignoring the murmurs of concern from the more conservative council members. Their directive will be simple. Make themselves useful while being as creative as possible. Field Marshal Korvax, Supreme Commander of Coalition Forces, studied the battle data with skeptical eyes. You're suggesting we officially sanction undisciplined behavior. I'm suggesting we recognize that human creativity flourishes under conditions we previously considered detrimental to military discipline, Hezdex Trill countered. The results speak for themselves. The Council approved the proposal by a narrow margin, and within days, coalition shipyards became testing grounds for human innovations that violated conventional military logic, yet proved devastatingly effective. Commander Chen, now promoted to Major, supervised the first Chaos Engineer unit aboard the coalition flagship Inevitable Victory. The ship's traditional command staff watched in horror as humans swarmed through critical systems with minimal oversight, making modifications that would normally require months of testing and approval. They're adjusting the gravitational compensators, reported the ship's Mindara chief engineer, her plumage flattened in distress. Something about creating what they call space-skipping stones. Major Chen nodded. Projectiles that bounce between enemy ships. The gravitational variance creates a temporary field that prevents the energy from dissipating after initial impact. That's theoretically impossible, the engineer protested. Yet they've already demonstrated it works in simulation, Chen replied with a shrug. Try not to overthink it. In the communications bay, human specialists developed songbone protocols that embedded destructive code sequences within catchy musical patterns. Hive mind ships can't filter them without disrupting their own communications, explained Lieutenant Kumar. They have to choose between coordination and security. The most promising development came from Private First Class Sanchez, who had spent 3 months on Outpost Zeta 9, painting elaborate designs on her bunk ceiling out of sheer boredom. Her understanding of color patterns and visual processing led to confusion camouflage, ship coating that exploited weaknesses in Hive visual processing centers. Their optical systems process information in predictable sequences. Sanchez explained to a baffled coalition admiral. This pattern interrupts that sequence, creating milliseconds of delay in target acquisition. You discovered this by painting your ceiling, the admiral asked incredulously. Sanchez grinned. I was really bored, sir. As weapons development accelerated, even the most traditional coalition commanders had to admit that human boredom had transformed conventional soldiers into something the hive mind could never have anticipated. Warriors whose greatest weapon was their need for entertainment. When the first fully human-modified fleet deployed to the contested Proxima sector, Coalition Command held its collective breath. Field Marshal Korvax summed up their anxiety perfectly. We're either witnessing the dawn of a revolutionary military doctrine, or we've just handed our best ships to lunatics. The hive mind launched their major offensive with absolute confidence. Their collective intelligence had analyzed all previous encounters with coalition forces and developed countermeasures for standard tactics. Their probability models showed a 98.7% chance of victory. What they encountered instead defied their collective comprehension. Coalition Admiral Thex Trill stood on the bridge of the flagship Inevitable Victory, watching tactical displays with a mixture of awe and terror as human-modified ships executed maneuvers that violated multiple laws of conventional spacefaring. Randomized response protocols active on all vessels, reported his Sorvak tactical officer, scales shimmering with nervous energy. The fleet is moving according to patterns derived from something the humans call jazz improvisation. Ilex Trill nodded, remembering Major Chen's explanation. Predictable patterns get you killed. Jazz never repeats exactly the same way twice. The hive ships advanced in their customary geometric formation, weapons charging, and then faltered as their targeting systems encountered the first human countermeasure. Confusion camouflage performing as expected, the tactical officer noted. Hive targeting accuracy down 42%. Across the battle space, coalition ships projected false sensor readings based on patterns derived from human card games. The randomized yet structured nature of these deceptions overwhelmed Hive analytical systems, which struggled to distinguish legitimate targets from phantom readings. "Deploy the drones," Des Trill ordered, still not entirely convinced this particular human innovation would work. From launch bays across the Coalition fleet, swarms of what appeared to be standard hive mind drones emerged, perfect replicas created by bored human engineers who had spent months studying captured units just to see if they could. Each carried a specialized EMP device designed to mimic standard hive communication signals until activated. The ultimate prank, Engineer Lopez had called it when presenting the concept. The Coalition brass had been skeptical until demonstrations proved the Hive couldn't distinguish these counterfeits from their own units. Now those false drones infiltrated the enemy formation, accepted as returning scouts by the Hive's recognition protocols. At a predetermined signal, they activated simultaneously, sending cascading electromagnetic pulses through the Hive fleet's neural network. On the main view screen, Dex Trill watched as Hive ships began moving erratically, their normally perfect coordination shattered. "Their collective consciousness is fragmenting," the sensor officer reported with disbelief. "Individual ships are attempting to establish isolated command protocols." The moment that epitomized the battle came when Commander Rodriguez's strike team breached the Hive Queen's command ship using maintenance tunnels they had discovered through what humans called vent crawling competitions during their downtime on outpost stations. "The proper term is speedrunning," Rodriguez had explained during mission briefing. "Finding the fastest, most efficient path through a complex environment. We've been mapping every access point on captured Hive ship schematics for months." Now Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm system. "Package delivered. Primary neural node neutralized. Requesting immediate extraction." The Hive fleet, suddenly cut off from their central intelligence, fell into disarray. Ships fired at random targets, including their own vessels. Some attempted retreat, while others maintained attack vectors with no coordination. For the first time in the decade-long war, Coalition forces claimed a decisive victory against the previously unstoppable enemy. Hours later, as damage reports and victory celebrations flowed in equal measure, Admiral Dex Trill reviewed the battle data. His exoskeleton pulsed with colors indicating profound realization as he studied the captured hive mind communication records. One transmission, sent moments before the Queen's ship lost connectivity, stood out from all others. "Avoid engagement with human-modified vessels at all costs. Their pattern disruption capabilities represent an existential threat to collective processing." The hive mind, a consciousness built entirely on mathematical precision and perfect coordination, had encountered something it could not compute: human randomness born of boredom. 6 months after the decisive victory against the hive mind, the Coalition Military Academy on Centaur Prime looked nothing like its former self. Where once rigid rows of simulation chambers and lecture halls had dominated the campus, now sprawling creation zones and innovation laboratories stretched across the grounds. Admiral Dex Trill, recently appointed as Director of Strategic Development, guided the Galactic Council representatives through the transformed facility with a pride that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "This training area is implementing what we call structured unstructuring," he explained as they passed a chamber where recruits from 17 different species were attempting to build functional communicators from seemingly random components. "We deliberately place cadets in minimally stimulating environments with random resources and encourage them to innovate." Aquilian representatives' sensory bristles quivered with concern. "They appear to be playing." Precisely, Dr. Vextel confirmed, joining the tour with data tablets in all 4 hands. What looks like play is actually their minds seeking stimulation through creative problem-solving. We've documented a 47% increase in tactical innovation across all participating species. The group moved to the engineering section, where mixed species teams worked on various pieces of equipment with minimal supervision. A young Mendari technician had modified a standard food synthesizer under the guidance of a human engineer, creating a device that somehow produced nutrient formulations perfectly calibrated to individual species biochemistry, while simultaneously playing musical tones. Engineering sections on all ships now include creation stations, where personnel can modify non-essential equipment. Admiral Zegsertrill continued. These modifications are evaluated weekly, and promising innovations are developed for broader implementation. The most significant change was visible in the combat training zones, where mixed species units performed drills, unlike anything in traditional coalition doctrine. Alien soldiers provided the foundation of discipline and structure, while humans supplied the unpredictable creativity that had proven so effective against the hive mind. We call it controlled chaos, explained Major Chen, now head of integrated training. Each species contributes their natural strengths. The Sorvak bring precision, the Luminar provide analytical processing, and the humans. She gestured toward a group of human cadets who had somehow transformed a standard defensive barrier exercise into a competitive game involving increasingly improbable ricochet shots. The humans bring inspiration, she finished with a smile. As the tour concluded, news arrived that changed the political landscape forever. The hive mind had requested peace negotiations. 3 weeks later, in the Grand Hall of Harmony, representatives from all coalition species gathered to witness the historic moment. The hive emissary, a rare individual node with the authority to speak for the collective, addressed the assembly with characteristic directness. Our analysis confirms continued conflict would be disadvantageous, the emissary stated, compound eyes fixed on the human delegation. The unpredictability quotient of human combat doctrine exceeds our adaptive capacity. As formal treaties were prepared, Admiral Zegsertrill gave a speech that would be remembered for generations. We won this war not because humans are the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species. We won because they simply cannot stand being bored, and in that restlessness, they found weapons that logic alone could never devise. Later, as celebration echoed through the hall, Dr. Vextel found the Admiral watching the human delegates in the back of the room, already folding the ceremonial programs into some sort of flying projectiles. Should we stop them? She asked, noting how several younger aliens were watching the impromptu paper aircraft competition with fascination. Admiral Zegsertrill's exoskeleton rippled with amusement. On the contrary, Doctor, I believe we should join them. He accepted a folded paper creation from a grinning human diplomat. The war is over, but human creativity remains our greatest asset. Who knows what galactic challenges await us next? As the first paper aircraft soared across the Hall of Harmony, followed by dozens more from beings of all species, Zegsertrill realized that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't their technology or even their tactical innovations. It was teaching the stars how to play.